Hello, and a very warm welcome to this roundtable with me, David Foster. Now, what sticks in your mind when it comes to black protests? Maybe words such as, I have a dream, maybe shocking scenes of brutality, of young people perhaps unaware of what they've let themselves in for, or maybe fully aware that pictures of that very instant, that day, can bring about the changes they're fighting for. Well, today, as we look more closely at the Black Lives Matter movement, we will examine a few memorable images through the eyes of a photographer, a former reporter, and a man who tries to teach people why these moments matter.
In the age of smartphone and social media, Black Lives Matter activists have a way to get their message to a massive audience. The video of George Floyd's killing helped to galvanise the wave of protest that followed. Other deaths, like the shooting of Ahmaud Arbery while he was out jogging, have also prompted shock and outrage. 67% of US adults say they support the Black Lives Matter movement, with most of them, 38%, saying they strongly support it. Many of the images captured in the Black Lives Matter campaign have echoes of the civil rights movement of the 1950s and 60s. Demonstrators from both eras have used similar strategies and have been met with force from the police, knowing it could be captured on film. Margaret Burnham, director of the Civil Rights and Restorative Justice Project, says, "We did exactly what young people are doing today. Pressure on the streets was a critical dynamic element to get voices heard that had been shut out of the American conversation." The videos and photos from the Black Lives Matter movement show that the struggle goes on. But how important will these latest images be in bringing about lasting change?
I'm delighted to say that joining us from Atlanta in the US, we have Sheila Pree, bright photographer and author of 1960 Now, photographs of civil rights activists and Black Lives Matter protests. We go to Dallas in Texas and say hello to Craig Flournoy, professor of journalism at the University of Cincinnati and a Pulitzer Prize winner. And in Louisville, Kentucky, we find Dewey Clayton, professor of political science at the University of Louisville. Welcome to you all. We're going to look at the power of imagery in this program when it comes to the protests. And I want you all, if you may, with regard to the first series of images we're going to see, the death of George Floyd, 8 minutes 40 seconds, the last 8 minutes 40 seconds of his life. To put aside your professional thoughts, and starting with you, Sheila, tell me your personal feelings having seen these images.
Actually, when I saw the video, and as a Black woman, I felt that it was a modern day lynching. I thought about my ancestors who the families had to watch Black males that were being lynched. And we were looking at this globally around the world. And when he said, Mama, calling out for his mother, I cried. I cried, and enough is enough.
Dewey, let me come to you first of all.
Sure.
Sheila's given us her thoughts. Dewey, your personal feelings on these images.
I was horrified, and one of the reasons I was horrified is because for 8 minutes and 46 seconds, you had three individuals that were treating George Floyd like he meant nothing, like he was not even human. I mean, the fact that they could go through that, that's a long period of time. It just really terrified me. I was so saddened, and I cried too. It was unbelievable, man's inhumanity to man.
Craig, you are a seasoned journalist, not only personally, but from the point of view of the way stories are told. What do these pictures say to you?
What they tell me is that they show that something that a man named Heman Marion Sweat told me on the 25th anniversary of the Brown decision in 1979 is still true. Heman Marion Sweat was the first man to integrate the University of Texas. And I asked him how much progress would be made. He said, we've made some, but he added, you can not melt the black, you can never melt the black man into America. And that's what I looked at, and I thought that day, looking at these three white cops calmly killing a man, as though they were out on a Sunday picnic. And there was absolutely no emotion in what they were doing. And the fact that they were so stoic about it made the whole horrific incident that much worse.
Well, let's look back. Craig, I'll start with you. Do reverse order if you like here. May 1963. This is Birmingham, Alabama. A black demonstrator and two big Alsatians being leashed back by the police, but clearly a very frightening situation. You know the picture I'm talking about. What does this say in terms of the power of the imagery, Craig?
What it says is that you can write 1,000 words, but one photo can have far more impact. What happened on that day was exactly what the organizers of that campaign hoped for, that Bull Connor, the Public Safety Commissioner of Birmingham, would overreact using fire hoses and police dogs. And the image of that young black man calmly standing there as this dog is about to bite a large section of his stomach said a great deal about both what white America wanted to do to preserve segregation and what black America was willing to do to dismantle it.
Okay, that was 1963. Dewey, let me go to you. 1965, Selma, Alabama, a place that is synonymous with the race struggles. George Wallace, governor there, known as a very, very severe authoritarian figure when it comes to race relations. This was their Bloody Sunday. There's been one in Northern Ireland, as some of you may know, but this was their Bloody Sunday. What do you think we're seeing here? Dewey, what does it say about 1960s Southern U.S.?
Well, it says a lot about Alabama and the South in particular at that time. That was a march protesting African Americans in Selma, particularly not having the right to vote. And the protesters wanting to send a message to George Wallace, wanting actually to march from Selma to Montgomery, the capital. George Wallace's governor was determined that was not going to happen. And it shows just the lengths that the white establishment would go to in keeping African Americans from achieving their goals and just using any means necessary in reality to sort of keep them down, to beat them, to harass them, and to make sure that they are treated like they're not humans.
Have photos such as this made any real difference? Dewey?
Oh, yes. There's no doubt about it. These pictures went out all around the world. In fact, Bloody Sunday pictures went out later on that evening. ABC, I think, interrupted their Sunday night movie Judgment at Nuremberg, of all things. And they went into the homes of the American people. And that is clearly what the movement wanted. They knew that the media, they could use them to their advantage. And so this was something that many white Americans in particular around the country had heard about the civil rights movement, but it was a Southern problem. When they started seeing these images and seeing the brutality, that changed things. These pictures went out all across the country, in various cities across the country. There were protests, not so unlike the protests that we've had around countries here.
Let's go to Sheila as a photographer here, because Dewey's saying that the protesters themselves knew that the images would be used for whatever reason. 1968, this picture here, Memphis, Tennessee, complaining about the treatment of sanitation workers. When you are out taking photographs, and we'll see some of yours in just a moment, when you are out, are you aware that you are being used in any way?
I have a different point of view of this. I feel that back in the 60s with the civil rights movement, photographs were very important to get the message out. But now we have technology where we have citizens that are on their phones, and in a minute of a second, images and video can be disseminated across the world. And I, as a photographer, when I'm out shooting, I am not thinking about the images that the media project and want to see, because I have a book out now, and what I'm questioning right now is imagery, we're repeating history. So is it really working?
When you're out taking a photograph, what are you looking for, This wasn't one of yours. We'll see yours in just a moment. Are you looking to show the rage or something different?
I'm not looking to show the rage. I'm looking to show how these communities are hurting. I've seen the pain. I've seen the hurt. I've seen the fear. And that's what I'm trying to show. I'm trying to show an alternative to that because I want people to feel. I had an editor just call me from Bloomberg. She said, I'm tired of seeing a Black man on top of a car with fire. She said, we are projecting those images too, and we have to do something different. And far too long, the imagery has been controlled by the white male narrative, and that has to change.
Interesting here. Let's go to Craig. Same photograph. And Sheila's saying she doesn't want to show the rage necessarily, the anger, but perhaps the complexity of the situation. And interesting for me here that you have at the front, I am man, and then a white man, and then I am man, and then it looks to me like another white man. What does this say to you journalistically?
What that says to me is that's one of the few photos, that iconic civil rights photos, in which a black man is not presented as a victim. Most of the iconic photos, whether of the corpse of Emmett Till or the two earlier ones that you showed for both Birmingham and Selma, it's the blacks are being, African Americans are being brutalized. And we know about that. That's important. But it's also important to show African Americans as actors, as activists, as people who are making their own history. And that's exactly what's happening. And it's not just, who are they? They are sanitation workers. They are folks who generally considered at the lowest end of the socioeconomic order. And that phrase, I am a man, to me resonates as much then as Black Lives Matters resonates today.
And I am a man facing the point of a bayonet. That is also the message in this photograph, yeah?
Yes.
Let's go to Dewey on this one. I wasn't sure whether we would have time. We wanted to show all sorts of different pictures, but one image constantly came up in the 60s, and that was of Martin Luther King. And I wondered why this one, which is taken in Chicago at Soldier Field, 1966, why that one was regarded as one of the most powerful pictures, when the I Have a Dream photograph showing the hundreds of thousands of people in the nation's capital was probably more often used than this one.
Well, that's probably true, but I think Chicago represents something different during the movement. Most of the movement occurred in the South, okay, and the country as a whole looked on Southern whites in particular as being racist, and the North in many instances got a pass. And when King went to Chicago, he was amazed at the segregation there, and he was amazed at the racism there, and death threats that he received. And he even made the statement that he was just amazed, and Chicago was clearly just as bad as the South was. And so I think that was an awakening for a lot of people around this country, that it wasn't just the segregation in the South as such, but there was segregation that was deep-rooted in the North and northern cities, particularly in cities like Chicago as well.
And Sheila, when you take a look at this photograph, what do you see in Dr. King's face? Do you see anger, determination? What do you see about his personality?
I see more determination. Determination, because I think for far too long, a lot of the narratives around imagery when it comes to the African American culture, especially with protesting, is like the Black male is defiant, he's angry. And by all right, for far too long, this has been going on from generation to generation, from generation. And trauma has gone on from generation to generation in our culture.
And do you think you have to be a good photographer to take a picture such as this? Or let's say I was there, I'm a journalist, I can write, I can do programs such as this. But do you think you have to be a skilled photographer, or is it just the right place, the right time for a picture like this?
I can only answer for myself because I don't work for the newspaper, so I photograph what I would like to photograph and what I would like the world to see, because I think that I would like to humanize our culture, because far too long we've been treated like animals, and I want people to see the other side of it. So that is my intent when I'm going out to photograph.
Craig, you've worked alongside an awful lot of photographers, and you know as well as I do as a reporter that they can tell stories just as effectively as we can with words. As we move on to this one of Aisha Evans, 2016, pretty much round about the start of the Black Lives Matter movement, Baton Rouge police, and to me, this one is a Tiananmen Square type of moment. She is so utterly calm. The police don't seem to know what they are actually doing. And that's the kind of work you want from a photographer alongside you, isn't it?
That's exactly the kind of something that's different and something that captures both the humanity and the determination of what they're trying to accomplish. That's I absolutely, of all the photographs that you sent us, this might be the one that I think is the most powerful, in part because there's a woman in it, finally, and secondly, because it's so quietly defiant. She doesn't show any fear whatsoever. And I think that then this goes back to something that I was saying earlier. It's so important to show the African American as activist, as quietly courageous. Most people remember from the infamous Emmett Till lynching his battered corpse. What they forget is his great uncle standing up in a courtroom in Mississippi in 1959 and pointing a bony finger at the two defendants who he said came and kidnapped his nephew, Emmett Till, and saying, "Dar he." That took amazing courage. And an African-American photographer named Ernest Withers captured that photograph. And to me, that's as iconic a picture of the movement as the one in Baton Rouge that we're discussing.
Dewey, when we look at Aisha Evans here, one of the things that stands out to me is her calmness, as we've just acknowledged. But the fact that you can see the lower part of her legs, she is standing absolutely bolt upright. She is statuesque. And it's images such as this, as Craig points out, and I'm sure Sheila will do in just a moment, that actually summarize more than just the moment.
Oh, I agree totally. In fact, when I saw that image, it was actually startling to me, and I was sort of happy to see it. And I was reminded of the civil rights movement in the sense that, as you probably will know, that during the civil rights movement, often before marches and sit-ins and whatever, they would have workshops in how to be disciplined and how to show that resolve. And I was reminded of several images I remember from that time where some of the protesters just had that type of resolve. And when they looked at the police and looked at them in the eye, in many instances, the police just realized that they were not going to turn back, that they had had enough of it, and they were going to take whatever was thrown at them, but they were a force to be reckoned with.
Sheila, we're going to look now, and we may go back to some of those other ones in just a moment, but we're going to look now at two pictures from your book, 1960 Now. This was 2015. It was the Reclaim Martin Luther King Day. This was, I think, in Atlanta, your home city. Tell us why this one means a lot to you.
That was the day of here in Atlanta, because you all know that it's the home of the civil rights movement, and they have a parade. The young people called me and said that they were going to shut down the parade. And the hashtag that was going out was Reclaim Martin Luther King Day. And the purpose of all of that, the young people were very tired of the elders or anybody talking about the commercialization of Martin Luther King like he had a dream. He was about progression. And that image where it says speak no evil, I felt that, at the time, I jumped up on the stage where they had people speaking, and I felt that that was a very, very powerful image because it showed how you had a lot of people there, and that sign just speaks no evil, and we have to change. It's about progression with that. It's not about being defiant. It's about moving forward.
Okay, move on to the next one, which is a music related
Young
theme.
man, the young man, he's part of, I don't know if you guys know of the artist Janelle Monae. That's one of her artists that is part of her record label company called Wonderland. And they came out, they actually did a song, Say Her Name, What Hell What You Talking About? And when I was there photographing that, I personally get into the crowds with people and march with them because you can't help it, because there's a lot of emotion.
But
And
what does
that
this say to you
young
about
man,
Black Lives Matter? Because it isn't your typical image, is it?
right, right. That's what I was saying. When I go out to shoot, I'm trying to show something different based on the media, the projected images that media have. I wanted to show this black, I saw the tears coming down this black male. And to me, that was just so powerful. It was so powerful because a lot of times, well, 99% of the times, the black male is looked upon different based on the imagery that's put in the newspaper. So I wanted to show a different side of the black male. And like the other journalist said, it's about humanizing us. It's not about us just being victims, because I don't look at my community as victims. And I didn't go to journalist school, so I don't know if that's what they teach, that these
Well,
communities are victims. I don't look at that like
let's ask Craig, because a long time since either you or I were probably in journalism school, and they do not teach very often immersion, feelings of the sensitivity. They try to tell you to be objective, to stand back from the story. But can you be a good journalist, whether it be photographer or reporter, if you don't do what Sheila's saying?
Well, I first of all don't believe that anyone can be objective. I can absolutely believe that you can be fair. The problem with the vast majority of white journalists before, today, and probably in the future when it comes to race is that they don't do their job. A good journalist goes out and interviews people who's covering race in the white and black community. A good journalist goes out and questions white authority when they see what's been repeated. And I'm working on a book right now that looks at how the media, the white and black press, covered the first half of the civil rights movement. And time again, the white media failed to question white authority and failed to interview African Americans. I interviewed a man named Wyatt T. Walker, who was the executive director of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, who told me that the black press was what Dr. King and the folks in the SCLC relied on. They knew the white media missed it. And what that tells me is if the white media missed it then, they're probably missing it today. And a big
let's go to Dewey. Let's go to Dewey, because we don't have very much more time. And the suggestion from both Sheila and from Craig is that not only can you tell a story from a personal point of view, but you should almost, because it's a duty you have as a journalist. Therefore, one would hope, if that was a position you took, that these images could bring about change. Do you think the ones we're seeing now have the power to do that?
Oh, I think certainly. There is no doubt about it. I'm thinking about all of the images that we've just seen lately. We've seen images of people in my state of Kentucky. We've seen images of people in Hazard, Kentucky, Bowling Green, areas that have very few African American citizens, and it's just a group of whites just marching. We've seen from the sky in Washington, D.C., we've seen Black Lives Matter painted in yellow on 16th Street as you head to the White House. These are powerful images that are going out all around the world, and they've helped to spur and tell the story of what's actually happening here in America.
Thank you very, very much indeed. Thank you, Sheila. Thank you, Craig. Thank you, Dewey, for your presence on this program. Thank you for watching. And as we say goodbye from this roundtable, we're going to put together a collection of what we and our guest consider to be the most powerful images of protests in the USA in this most difficult time. Goodbye for now.